Even though President Donald Trump is leaving the White House, Trumpism is here to stay, says political scientist Ian Bremmer. Is America losing its global influence? Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and I'm here with Ian Bremmer, president and founder of the Eurasia Group and Jazeera Media, because we need to talk. So, Ian, you say we're living in a G0 environment, a quote, world of many pretenders but no leaders, which is quite catchy. What is the future of the U.S. as a global power in this leaderless world?
The most powerful country in the world. Coronavirus in some ways strengthens that the technology companies are only more important in this environment. It's how we're talking right now. It's how commerce is getting done. The United States dominates that space globally compared to its allies, much asymmetric, greater power now than even 5 years ago. China is the only other. I can point to so many other areas where American power is undiminished. But that doesn't mean the United States wants to lead the world. And there are many reasons for that. And some of them are domestic. The fact that a lot of Americans feel that an assertively globalist U.S. has not benefited them. And by the way, they have legitimate reasons to feel that way. And part of it is because the international environment is less aligned. Post-Brexit, Europe is weaker and more divided. That's true. Russia is in decline and angry about it, blames the United States and trying to undermine the U.S. And China is getting more powerful, but they're not becoming Western. They're not becoming politically more open or economically more free market. In fact, they're building competitive architecture. So if you take both the domestic U.S. factors and the geopolitical factors into account, the fact that Trump is no longer president and Biden will be president, is a factor. It does matter. But it doesn't change the world. And even though a lot of people in Washington might think it will, they're wrong. And we need to recognize that this G0 world that we are in is going to define the global order or disorder, such as it is, for quite some time to come.
Now, as countries around the world know, the U.S. government regularly criticizes foreign leaders for actions like the one Donald Trump has taken, refusing to concede, declaring himself the winner, and throwing doubt on the electoral process without any proof. Does this harm the credibility of the U.S. abroad?
Sure. It doesn't harm U.S. power, in the sense that the United States still has the global reserve currency. It's a major exporter of oil and gas and food, and the banks are really strong, and on and on and on, right? But in terms of the United States having a political system that other countries, other people would actually want to aspire towards, that's been eroding for a long time. But it's gotten a lot worse with the Trump administration, and it's getting worse with this reaction to the election. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in the last several days has been criticizing countries like Myanmar and Tanzania for irregularities in their elections, at the same time that President Trump is saying he's won an election that he hasn't won, refusing to concede, saying that there was election fraud when there is no evidence of such fraud. Clearly, the U.S. has no credibility to say that. And maybe we should let the Canadians take the lead in criticizing other countries' lack of democracy right now. That might be smart for us to take a break. We're not good at humility in the United States. We're good at many things, entrepreneurship, universities, we're fantastic, but we're bad at humility, and we kind of need to pick it up given what's happening politically in the country right now.
So let's talk about the rest of the world. The image of the United States abroad has plummeted since Donald Trump took office, and that's according to a recent Pew Research poll, with Germany, Japan, Australia showing record lows for U.S. favorability. Do you think that a Biden presidency will help America gain back its standing?
Sure. Keep in mind that the view of China under Xi Jinping has gone down about as precipitously at the same time in the last year, even as the Chinese got coronavirus right. This is after lying about it for the first month. These numbers move around a lot. There's a fair amount of what have you done for me lately? And under Obama, those numbers were a lot better. There has been a secular decline in the United States under Obama, Biden. A lot of people were saying leading from behind, we can't trust the United States anymore. You're not really a leader. I wrote about the G0 world, not a G7, not a G20. That was 10 years ago. That's before Trump as president would have been considered credible by anyone but The Simpsons. So, let's face it, Biden comes back and he rejoins the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization. He gets into COVAX for vaccines, Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement. He has, a victory tour with a bunch of leaders that no longer feel abused by the president of the United States emotionally anymore, don't have to walk on eggshells. Those numbers will turn up immediately. I mean, in 1 year time, you can do a Pew poll and those numbers will go up. But the United States will still have institutions that have eroded and they won't have been fixed. And the United States will still be a very deeply and badly divided country, and it won't have been fixed. And that country will not want the United States to be the global sheriff. That country will not want the United States to be the architect of global trade. And that country will not be capable of being the cheerleader of global values. And so even though the Pew attitudes of the Americans will bounce around, and I will be grateful for the fact that, we're not quite as disliked
Right.
for our leadership, that doesn't change the structural realities of a world that is no longer being led by the leader of the free world, the United States. We can't discuss it that way anymore.
So let's talk about regions. How will Biden's victory affect U.S. policy towards the Middle East? Do you see a President Biden reversing Trump policy when it comes to a region like Israel, Palestine?
Well, a lot of leaders have failed on Israel, Palestine, Democrats and Republicans. You remember John Kerry spent his first year and a half. That was his top priority when he was Secretary of State for Obama. And you will remember that Jared Kushner's Middle East peace plan was equally unfinished. Didn't lead to. I mean, the Israelis liked it. The Palestinians weren't even negotiated with. But so in other words, that's not going anywhere. Israel Palestine is broken and is not resolvable. But John Kerry also said there could be no peace between Israel and countries in the region unless Israel Palestine was resolved. He was wrong.
Mm.
And that is because there are bigger priorities for many countries in the region than Israel Palestine. And that was something that Trump got done with the Abraham Accords, normalization of Israeli relations with Bahrain, with Sudan, with the UAE, and more to come. I think Oman is close. I think Saudi Arabia is moving in that direction. So what does that mean? Well, I mean, I've spoken with all of Biden's senior people. They support that. They're not going to undo it.
Mm.
And they're not going to undo the embassy having moved to Jerusalem. The
Interesting.
place where they will be different is on Iran. And of course, Trump's decision to pull the United States unilaterally out of the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, was deeply unpopular with all of America's allies that were co-signatories. And Biden has made very clear that he would like the U.S. to get back into that deal. Now, that will not be easy to negotiate, certainly not before Iranian elections next year, but the orientation will be there. And some of the heat in that relationship will reduce. And if you're the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Israelis, who together believe that Iran, with reason, is their principal foe in the region, you're worried about a Biden presidency. I mean, as you know, not every country in the world welcomes
Right.
Biden as president. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, certainly much closer to Trump. Viktor Orban in Hungary, Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, even Boris Johnson in the UK.
So places that the world might see as a more authoritarian leader.
Some, Brazil's still very much a democracy. Boris Johnson in the UK, you would not make that argument. But then you would say Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, and no one would call him authoritarian. You would say he's corrupt, but you wouldn't say he's authoritarian. And he's gotten everything he could possibly want out of the Trump administration. So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, certainly most leaders in the world will prefer to see the back of Trump, but it is not universal, and it's not even a small handful. The Saudis, the Emiratis have been very comfortable. And Biden's focus on the Middle East is going to be less. He's focused much more on the environment. He's focused on green.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a major oil producing country, Biden is somewhat problematic for you on that front.
China is faring well economically. Will they have an easier relationship with a Biden administration?
They will have a less uncertain relationship, a less volatile relationship. I'm not sure it's easier. Trump certainly was a hawk on coronavirus, calling it the China flu. He was a hawk on technology, on 5G, for example, and he's gotten a lot of American allies on side. On willingness to put tariffs on the Chinese, on Hong Kong, on Taiwan, on the South China Sea. Biden will also be hawkish on most of those issues. Biden referred to Xi Jinping as a thug 2 weeks ago. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't him misspeaking. Trump has never done that. Trump personally speaks about Xi in usually fairly positive terms and certainly never insults him. I don't think this was just about the campaign. I do think that Biden and his administration has significant problems with what they consider to be the principal national security threat to the U.S. globally, which will be China. And they also will coordinate with American allies more closely, which is a problem for China. They also will be seen as walking the walk more on issues like human rights. I mean, the Americans are always going to be seen as hypocritical on those issues, but not like China. I mean, the United States is not engaging in creating concentration camps for 1 million of their citizens like the Chinese have with the Uyghurs. So, I mean, you cannot make the United States and China comparable in terms of rule of law. And one of the things Trump did that China liked was basically said, we're all about power politics. Values don't matter. The Chinese like that because it makes the Chinese seem less bad. And Biden will not do that. And that will be a problem for the Chinese.
What are some things we should be watching for regarding foreign policy in the years to come?
I think it's very interesting that Germany and Japan are the two largest democracies in terms of size of economy and power in the world after the U.S. They've just had the strongest leaders that they've had in decades, and they're actually engaging, unlike the U.S., in very smooth transitions with very little populism and anti-establishment sentiment. And by the way, the United States has absolutely nothing to do with that. In the Mediterranean, there's a fight right now between NATO allies, Greece, Turkey, France, for example. The United States is virtually irrelevant to that issue. You will remember when President Obama said Assad must go.
Yep.
Obama's gone. Assad is still there. The United States has very little to do with that. So the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world, but increasingly in a G0 world, there are going to be a lot of areas where you are going to see a lot of leaders, but not global leaders, and they're going to be fighting over outcomes. That creates a lot more uncertainty. That's what I'd be paying attention to.
Ian Bremmer, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining me on We Need to Talk. Keep your comments coming and let us know who you want to see next. And for the latest twists and turns of this post-election process, head over to aljazeera.com.